Thank you, computer, for telling me that. Hey guys, how y'all doing? This is Mr. Robison again. We're fixing to go through one of my chapters that's not my area of expertise that I mentioned in class. So y'all bear with me and forgive me if it gets very disturbing here for you on this chapter. I'm not going to go crazy on chapter 21 on protistas, but I know I had a couple of y'all ask some questions. I sent out a message to y'all about how I want y'all to answer this. So we're gonna just take a look at it. I have two short answer questions out of 21, and they're not in order per se. I think I give you a page number on one of them. But the thing I think is freaking people out is the other part here. And honestly, I'm not an expert on protistas or the next chapter, Fundas. Once I get through that, I think I'll try to be in a little bit better mood. But if you look at the review sheet, I've got here match the protista, the known examples and interesting things about each group. No examples that are interesting things about each group. I'm going to have those 17 on the test, and I'm going to have a matching group with 17 answers. Probably not going to have any fakery in here. I just want you to know who these organisms are, what that group is, and there's something interesting in our book about it. And as we go through it today, y'all may want to make out your answers here. I think there's probably room on that page to write these out. So we'll kind of go through that, and I'll try to make some sense out of it. So that'll be an easy, probably half a point each on that midterm test in person, right? Remember, you're going to come in and take that test. We'll have a little matching on that, not just short answer questions, okay? I'm going to share my screen now with the PowerPoints here. Okay, we're recording good. Okay, looking good. Okay, y'all can see that. And like I said, I'm just going to do my best here. Once again, I've never had a grade level class in this one, but this is, remember, introduction class. So let's get an introduction to it. I think I'm capable of leading you on that. Then I maybe have a little more details on things I know of later. So let's see if we get this going here, chapter 21. Okay, and just the overview of the chapter here. This just to talk about the general grouping, the biology of protistas. So the supergroups, they're going to break protistas down into these four supergroups. Okay, and then we'll just kind of work through that and see if we can find something interesting in each of these groups. I will tell you right out that I will pronounce all these wrong. I have trouble with pronunciation since kindergarten, so we'll do our best here, and I may just point to them. And well, I did actually look up some of the pronunciation. It still drives me crazy. I can't quite get these because we only cover it once every year. But anyway, so enough excuses. Let's dive into it. So classification of the domain, and remember this is one of our domains, eukaryotes. And so we're in domain eukaryote, meaning they have the nucleus system. So we're now working our way into our domain, guys. And the first kingdom we're looking at here is protistas, okay? Right off the bat, one of the things that's very interesting here is remember that these organelles that they have, remember, were thought to be evolved as, remember the organelles that the eukaryotes have, that we have, like the mitochondria and the plants have chloroplasts, are thought to be, and we have a lot of proof that they were separate protistas once that came to live in a larger cell, right? So they mentioned this early in the chapter, in the very first part of the chapter, it talked about that the aerobic bacterium became the mitochondria, right? And living in our cells now as a organelle. And then the cyanobacterium, some of them we believe are the chloroplasts in the plants. Okay, the protistas have a huge diversity in size, microscopic algae that we'll talk about, and protozoans to kelp more than 200 meters in length. Once again, I personally have a problem with that because to me, protistas are single-celled organisms and they're usually small, but the plant people don't want them in their group. They're kind of like there's a big debate, and remember I told you in taxonomy. Okay, many of the protistas are unicellular, very complex, amoeboids. Some are ciliated, some have amazing organelles, some can have contractile vacuoles. Protistas can be colonial, meaning they're living together, or live in a filamentous strand, right? So it's just a huge amount of diversity here. Nutrition-wise, they're all over the place. Some are photosynthetic, others are heterotrophs, meaning they eat somebody else, the dead organic matter usually, right? Some ingest food by endocytosis. Some do it by external digestion. Some are parasites. Look at this. Here's a cool new term, mixotrophs. Some can be both autotroph, can make their own food, can do photosynthesis. And if they're not in the mood for that, they can eat somebody. Okay, so we'll see that. And so a mixotroph would be an autotroph and a heterotroph. They can do both modes of nutritional taking food in. Life cycles are also pretty wild. Okay, most of them do asexual reproduction. It's very common. Sexual reproduction may occur if conditions are favorable, but usually they just do asexual reproduction. Some can have formation of a spore that allows the protista to survive hostile environments. Other can form a cyst, a dormant cell with a resistant outer covering that can survive until favorable conditions occur. And parasites, a cyst may serve as the means of transfer to a new host. And one of my first questions here talks about, second question on the review sheet talks about, and it's on page 378, not quite there, but it talks about this alteration and generation. I'm going to come back and talk about this life cycle, and we'll see this concept, and we'll talk. I'll talk about that when I get a picture up for it. But that's one of my short questions that a lot of y'all will probably see. Still, just general things. They have a huge importance ecologically, right? Environmentally, right? Ecologically. They produce their photoautotrophs, so the algae make oxygen that we really need. They function as producers in both freshwater and saltwater ecosystem. They make the plankton that so many of the small organisms eat, that the bigger organisms eat the smaller, so they're very important in the food chain. Matter of fact, one of the coolest things is, if you remember the whale, the largest animal in the sea, feed on plankton, one of the smallest organisms in the sea. So they're very important, that bottom layer of the food chain for fish, right? So if you like fish and stuff and all that, and this is very important. These plankton, smaller fish eat the plankton, and then the bass eats the smaller fish or whatever. Okay. Once again, very diverse, evolutionary-wise. Complexity and diversity of proteins makes them very difficult to classify. I'm just going to read these PowerPoint points here. Most classification schemes are proposed. There are many schemes proposed, and look, none have a broad support. So this is all over the place. Cannot be classified as plant, animal, or fungi. But one of the more interesting things here is that, to me, in the protistas, there are plant-like protistas, there are animal-like protistas, and there are fungilistic, I used to say, or fungi-like protistas. So it's probably obvious that maybe that plants and animals may have evolved out of this group. We don't know for sure, but we do know, as far as a group, there's a big debate about this. We know that they don't all have they're not monophyletic, meaning they don't all have a common ancestor. They don't all belong. That means they don't all belong to the same evolutionary lineage. But we're going to go with this general consensus here, these 6 supergroups, okay? So these are 6 supergroup taxonomic groups below the domain and above kingdom level, okay? And here's a cool picture showing them here. Here they are. Breaks them down here. These red algae, green algae, the SARs, with these stromophils, excavates, amoeboid, with the protozoans moving in that group. And then here's my favorite word, opisthokontai. Opisthokontai. These are single-cell multicellular protistas. That's a supergroup that includes the single-celled multicellular protistas and animals and fungi. So we're in that group. So that's kind of a crazy group there. So those would be the most animal-like of these of the protistas are going to fall in that group. These conoflagellants, okay? And so that's a supergroup that we belong in. Look at this picture. So here is these groups, supergroups here. And here is another way to look at it, a common ancestor of the eukaryotes. Look down here at the top, up here. Look down here at the top, listen to me. Red algae and these guys up here, these are supergroups we're just talking about right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and look. So red algae, chlorophytes, land plants, and charophytes. So that's the plant, land plants, and their descendants. Brown algae, green algae, gold brown algae, diatoms, water moles fall kind of this little group. Epicomplexas, dinoflagellants, ciliates, forminides, radiochlorians. Okay, all these guys are euglenas, one I'm familiar with. The slime moles, weird group, amoebas, animals. See, we fall in that group with these dinoflagellants, eukaryotes, and fungi. Woo, kind of crazy, yes. So I'm not going to go crazy on here, but we're going to, and I got spelling of these either in my class. We're going to match these on your sheet to something unique about them, okay? And we'll kind of pull through these. I'm just going to go right through the book here, maybe even answer these for you as we go through it. Okay, we'll start out here on, I'm looking at this on page 277. Got your book out. And the very first one here, the green algae, right? Look at this. So the green algae are protistas that do photosynthesis, over 8,000 species. This just blows my mind that you could go spend your life working on 8,000 species of green algae. And look at that, inhabit environments including ocean, freshwater, snowbanks, tree banks, turtle, back of a turtle. Many of them are symbiotes with fungi, plants, and animals. They're majority unicellular, but some are filamentous and colonial. We'll see some pictures of that in a minute. Some are multicellular and resemble leaves of lettuce. That say, once again, I don't like multicellular organisms in protistas, but then again, I'm not in charge of all this. They can be anywhere from, they can be, anywhere from green, obviously, to orange, red, and red color. And they're divided into these groups, the chlorophytes and then these charophytes, okay? So our first little question here, what are the chlorophytes? Well, look at here. Chlorophytes are going to be, take a look, small, inhabit freshwater pools. Fossil ancestor date back to over a billion years. They have a cell wall, cup-shaped chloroplast that do photosynthesis. They can have flagellum. Here's a picture of one of these, of the group. So these are common algae that we see in water, right? Okay. And then here's another one. Talks more about them. As many as they can reproduce asexually. They can have occasional sexual reproduction. And in their life cycle, look at this. They produce these zygospores. So I love these life cycle pictures. We're gonna look at a lot of these. So here's our algae. Okay. And notice that it is haploid. So by the way, wherever the most coloration is, whichever side is bigger, a lot of the protistas fall in the same with the plants, and that they have an alteration of generation. Now let's talk about this, because this is going to really freak you out. Because see, what we think about is what we know. Okay, so we as humans, every cell in your body is a diploid cell, and the only place you have haploid cells in your body are in your ovaries and testicles when you're making sperm or egg, whichever you have. Okay, then we come together, make babies, and make a diploid zygote cell that grows into a human in the woman's womb. Then the baby comes out of mother, and it grows over 18, 20 years, and then it continues that circle of life. So knowing that, as you probably do by the age of 18, you know where babies come from. We have a diploid body part, that's us, humans, adults. But then we would say, but we don't have this alteration generation like we say. So, but most of all of our life is diplonic, and the only haploid is our sperm and eggs. So our other generation would be sperm and eggs that come together to make a baby. Well, animals, everybody else don't play the same game. This algae here, has a dominant haploid life cycle. So when you go out here and you look at water and see the water tinted green in your aquarium, that's what you're seeing, these guys. And most of it is this haploid structure with a flagellum, one along with another, kind of crazy. They produce spore, these gametes can fuse together, fertilization, kind of like our sperm and egg, and make a diploid zygote. Okay? And then that zygote divides many times and forms a bundle of these zygospores, with every zygospore being diploid. Then it releases spores that are haploid. And those haploids grow and become what we see as the asexual most dominant cycle, is this haploid structure that's this little algae in the water. Kind of weird, right? Now let me blow your mind while I got you blind blown. Pine trees, the tree is the diploid structure, and it has two cones on the end, two different types of cones up in this tree. You may not know this. These cones are the haploid generation. One of them makes pollen, the other makes the egg, and they are the haploid generation. Okay, and then wind takes the pollen over and they fertilize, and then the baby seeds are released, and then their gametes fall off. The cones fall off. That's their gamete. So their alteration generation is the sporophyte of the tree, and then these cones, which are the haploid generation. And in them, the haploid generation is attached to the tree. Okay, here, the haploid generation is the dominant, and the sporophyte is produced, and it only lives a short time and makes more of these haploid generations. So you see this alteration generation, with this being a dominant haploid organism that usually just divides by asexual reproduction here. Just makes copies of its DNA itself, and then divides into two daughter cells. So when I talk about this alteration generation, you can look at some of these pictures and go, oh my gosh, this is 21, I think 15, 25. It's back there on 378, still coming up here. Let me see here. I ain't got to it. But 378, yeah, they have a generalized picture. I think it's gonna, I don't know if it's in the PowerPoint. Let's see if it's in the PowerPoint. I don't think it is. I'm looking at that one on 25. figure 21.5 on page 378 that shows you that most organisms have a haploid diploid generation. And what we see is that these first algae have a dominant haploid, and some of the first plants we're going to see do that, and then they flip to a dominant diploid structure, which is our structure here too. So it's kind of weird. Okay, so chlorophytes probably, I'm looking at that, would probably be, I would think something would be our basic algae, right? That just out there like this one right here that make the food source for so many other organisms in a plant in a lake. Okay. All right, we'll look at some more of this. Kind of weird, I know. Let's look at some colonial. Here's colonial volvox. Each of those little green circles is an algae. We usually look at these in lab. So that is 100 or 50 or 100 algae living together. So volvox is a colonial version of this. Okay. Here's one where you have a multicellular green algae that looks like sea lettuce. Look at this. So there it is. And once again, what you're seeing here is the diploid structure. There's a picture I was looking for. This alteration here where you have the haploid structure and diploid structure. So look at that. Isn't that wild? Here's its life cycle. They have its life cycle there. But you can see it has this multicellular sporophyte there. Okay. Others here, Spirogyra is a cool one. It's a filamentous. Look at that. And we look at that usually in lab where it has a spiral structure, chloroplast inside the cell under a light microscope. Here it shows them undergoing conjugation where they share part of their DNA with each other. But usually it's a spiraling structure in the middle there of the chloroplast. Red algae fall in this group too. Seaweeds that are pretty famous, 7,000 species of this group, including the black wrapping around sushi rolls is made from this group. Auger found in cosmetics, food prep, emulsification for chocolate and cosmetics. So a lot of this is pulled out. Some of the red algae can be made more than 70 meters long, so pretty long. There's some of that is around the edges of our sushi. Here's what I'm talking about. There's some red algae. Here's another one there. Looking at these, then we go to the second supergroup, the SARs. Okay, so if I get my story straight here, we got the chlorophytes and the charophytes would be these phytomilus like that do the Spirogyra, and we could throw in the Spirogyra, and that's our best example of that one. And this one here, this charophyte, look at here, this one right here falls in that group. Okay, and if you think it's anything interesting about it, and then the red algae also fall in this group. Okay, we'll find something interesting there about those guys. They're filamentous, I guess, and they can do conjugation for these charophytes. Okay, and then the red algae is mixed there. Okay, then this next supergroup, the SAR standing for these stromophytes, the alveolates, and the rhizaria, okay, include brown algae, diatoms, golden brown algae, and water mold. Now let's look at each of these. So the brown algae, kind of going with the flow here. I have pictures of this. I'm in your book on 380. 1,800 species of this. Most live in colder ocean water on rocky coastal areas. Multicellular. Some have some are small forms and simple filaments. Others can be 200 meters long. Have the brown color, accessory pigments, right? Store the food. Here's what they kind of look like. Not much crazy about these. Then the second group in here, here's an interesting one here, some of the seaweed fucus. A lot of people talk about that one. We think we have a life cycle of that. Harvested for food and fertilizer, so these are eaten by people. Algin, a thickening agent in ice creams and sherbets and cream cheese, comes from these guys. Okay. The next one, this one is has a brown algae look to it. A brown algae alternation generation, weird life cycle here. Don't know much about that one other than once again fucus here. You have a picture of that in your book there. Looks like little green filaments. Diatoms are really cool. They have a silica shell. Okay, and these are used as filtering agents in water filters, soundproofing material in housing and buildings, and the scrub. Sometimes those you get some of that soap that has grit in it. These are ground up and put in the soap as a polishing abrasive compound to help clean with. So pretty wild, right? Here, and they're very pretty, and they some of them have flagellum, so you can look at these. We have slides of the dinoflagellum. It's kind of cool. And then we've got the golden brown algae, right? Another group here, two flagellum, 1,000 species. can do photosynthesize. Others are, there's a mixotrope in there that can phagocyze others. Make up part of the marine plankton here, right? You can see the algae, excuse me, the flagellum coming out here, of the golden brown algae, so they can move on their own, right? So not just the others, we're just subject to whichever way the ocean blows them, but these guys can move on their own. That's a pretty weird group here. So maybe a comment about the diatoms there. The water mold, okay, look at this one. This causes a lot of the parasites that you see on fish. They live in the water, form furry growth. It looks like a hairball on the side of a fish. If you ever got ick in a fish, you've dealt with these. They're parasitic, 700 species, a lot of them. Most of them eat dead organic matter. They caused, here's a good one, they caused the potato famine in Ireland in the 1840s and the mildew of the grapes in France in 1870. This might be a good test from there for this group, for these water moles. And here they are on the dead goldfish. So they like to eat dead gold. They're parasiting fish. Okay. Then our next super group, the dinoflagellants, we're moving on. They're still in that SAR. Dinoflagellants in this group are famous, right, for their little longitudinal and transverse grooves that they have, 2,000 species. But the biggest thing I think they're famous for is they produce a toxin. This species here causes red tide, where they get an overproduction of these organisms. It's all the fertilizer or waste is put into the ocean. The algae then over-reproduce and make this toxin that will kill fish and can even cause respiratory paralysis in someone who's eaten the fish that have had this. So look at that. So this is a red tide out there forming. I don't see the red tide. Usually they put a picture. It's just this little sludge looking here, but it will kill the fish. I've actually been at the coast and seen that myself. So it's a dinoflagellant outbreak, which is in our SARS group, the diatoms there, right? Okay, and then we're going to go to, we get our ciliates. That was the dinoflagellant, that last one. And then ciliates have hundreds of cilia that beat in rhythm, and that allows them to move and to pull food into their gullet. They have an opening here for food. Look at this. So here are the ciliates, and here's the world famous parent. These are rather large protozoans. You can feel them tickle your throat if you swallow some pond water. But they have this gullet, and they'll pull food in. And here's another one with that oil groove. So they'll bring food in, and then everybody in just one cell though, then the food comes in and spread out to all the parts that need food, need energy. So parameciums is an example of the ciliates, right? The word, this is a cool word, epiocomplexans, right, are usually a group, and that's still in that super group that the reproductive mode is kind of not understood or complex. These are usually obligate parasites, form spores, okay, and they can cause, look at that, Plasmodium infects 350 to 500 million people each year, of whom more than 1 million die from Plasmodium vivax malaria. So this includes the Plasmodium vivax that causes malaria. Here's another one, Toxoplasmodium gonorrhea there, that infects cats and humans and can cause birth defects, mental retardation when pregnant women are exposed to this Apiocomplexum protistas. Okay. The other ones here, I think our next term here is, we're still looking at these, the Apiocomplexans. We're going to look at the life cycle, by the way, of malaria, and actually that's good. This is one, the foraminifers form the skeleton that it forms the White Cliffs of Dover, right? So that'll be a calcium carbonate on the side of this beautiful cliff here, and here's that one. So that would be a good one to know, right? That these guys, that Rhizoarians, number 10, foraminifers, or whatever you want to pronounce it, make this, that is the organism there that makes this is their shell, okay, that forms the White Cliffs of Dover in England, I guess. And look at this. So back to our discussion question. Briefly describe the cycle of Plasmodium vivax that causes malaria. Look at this. This protozoan lives in the gut of a female mosquito. And when it bites you for blood in its salivary gland, it excretes this into your body. Okay, so a mosquito bites a human, the sporocyte passes from the mosquito's salivary gland into the bloodstream and then the liver of the host. Then the spores produced in the liver cell enter into the bloodstream, and then the red blood cells where they feed as these trapezoites. So they go to the red blood cells. When the red blood cell rupture, they release more of these in the blood. So you have these cycles of fever and cold, right? Some of these become gamma phytes which enter the stream and they're taken up in the mosquitoes that bite you. So you get bit by mosquitoes, you put it back into them, that new mosquito, and that's how it's transmitted. So we're the transmission of it between them, okay? Then they get in that bloodstream and carry on and carry on. And so this is a mind blower. The mosquito net that you've seen in all these movies and stuff, I always thought the mosquito net was for the person that was infected, right? To keep them from getting sicker. Actually, that is not for them. That is to keep them from getting bit by another mosquito that can then bite you and give it to you. Paradigm shift, okay? And I guess if you're not infected, getting under mosquito net is good too, right? So you don't get one that gives it to you. But it actually, when someone's sick, is put under a mosquito net, it is to protect everybody else in the group, because it bites them, picks it up, and then gives it to other people. Okay. Now, of course, the crazy thing here, people who have, oh my gosh, losing my mind here. There is some resistance to this if you have what? What's the disease? Anybody remember that one? So a lot of people who have, oh, we have to pause a second. My mind's going blank here. I'm trying to remember what it is. Anyway, it'll come to in a minute. A little long day, but pretty wild one here. This still kills millions of people in Africa, and we see a large number of people still carry this. My daughter actually went to Africa on a mission trip a couple of years ago and spent about 2 months, I think about 45 days, something like that. And they went down and treated people with this, and they had treatments for it. So you have to take a series of drugs to knock it out. But very common down in those places, and in Africa, okay, and very can kill you, right, and can be quite dangerous, right. But the host in us is the liver cells and the red blood cells, right. All right, we'll come back to that. But that's a good question there. I want you to talk about how the female bites. A female mosquito bites, she puts it in from its salivary gland in your bloodstream to your liver, to your red blood cells, and then into your blood, so that then if you get bit by a mosquito, then you can give it to mosquito, and that's how it keeps getting transmitted. Oh, so my mind come back to me. Sickle cell anemia, people who have sickle cell anemia, which is very common in African countries, their red blood cells are sickle shaped, and the protozoa can't live in their cells. So if you're a sickle cell carrier, you have immunity, quite a bit of immunity to malaria. So we see high incidence of sickle cell in African countries and places where malaria is very high, but still kills millions of people every year. Okay, there we got our white cliffs of Dover, okay? And now we're out of that group, finally out of that supergroup, to the excavates, okay, which have an atypical or absence of mitochondria and distinctive flagellum. They have this deep group. Small freshwater unicellular organism, difficult to classify. They have their two flagellums, the very distinctive flagellum, okay? And this is the part that blows my mind, including my favorite one, the euglena. But they'll talk about, remember the little game, the little box, I don't know if you ever had this as a kid, but we used to have these little books that had 3 sections, like a book with 3 different groups. And the first would be the head, mid-body, and the tail of an animal. And you could flip it. You could have the head of a zebra, the body of a dolphin, and the tail of a cat. Okay. Well, I'm thinking God's playing with this one here, because you got a protista that has an eye spot, moves towards something, but it's also photosynthetic, has chloroplast. So this is almost a blending of an animal and a plant in the kingdom protista. Okay, let's look at them. So here's a euglena, and look at this: tail, flagellum, an eye spot, nucleus. They can swim where they want to go. Contractile vacuole, they can move around. They can move. They can say movement with an eye and chloroplast if they need to make some energy, or they can eat somebody else, I guess. But they can do photosynthesis. They can do their fix it. They can go either way. They can actually move on their own, which is animalistic, yet they do photosynthesis. Pretty wild. Okay. The cell is bound by flexible. There's an outer layer there. See if I get anything else interesting. Nothing else too much on that one, but I do find these guys very cool. Then it gets crazier here. We got another super group, still in that excavate, still in that group. Like I said, this ain't my area. I'm just doing the best I can. But in addition to euglena, you got these next group here that I know very little about here, but I do know some of their players here. These parapastilids include Trichinophus vaginus, which is a very common STD that lives in the female and can live in the male prostate and can swim back and forth between the boy and girl during intercourse. That's pretty bad, and we have to take special parasitic drugs to kill that, and that's mentioned in your book. And then another one I'm familiar with is Giardia, if I never can pronounce that right. Anyway, this is a really weird one here. most common flagellant in the human digestive tract, causes severe diarrhea, okay, and it's transmitted in contaminated water. And beavers are hosts for this. So most of our national parks, like for example, I've been to seven or eight times to Yosemite, and I hiked Half Dome about 7, 8 years ago when I was in a lot better shape. But you could not drink this beautiful, pristine water coming off the mountain because it is contaminated with this one. And if you drink the water, you will have severe diarrhea within a couple of hours. And so we had special filters to filter the water from the stream because we were on this 28-mile hike that we did in one day, and we didn't want to tote 5 gallons of water with us. So we carried a couple bottles of water, and then we recycled it through this filter, and we didn't get sick. This is a really bad one that causes severe diarrhea, and you may have heard it. You may have gotten this before from contaminated water, specifically streams. A lot of times in some of our parks. Here it is. Pretty wild. There's a little critter. Okay, and then the last little one here, another one, a little weird one here. Still looking at stuff that I'm not super familiar with. Here's the one this is another one that's flagellant. It's kinetoplastids, and these include the trypanosomas, which are called the one at the bottom here, Trypanosoma bursia, causes African sleeping sickness, and it uses the tsetse fly as its vector to carry it. And look at this. So you can take a drop of blood and look in your blood, and you got these flagellant swimming protozoans in there, and you got African sleeping sickness. So if you do go to Africa, like on a mission trip, you have to take a lot of anti-malaria drugs and anti-parasitic drugs before you go because our bodies are just not used to this. Okay. Then the next supergroup of the amoebozoans include the amoebas that you're familiar with, right? And they have this pseudopod to move and to ingest food with by phagocytosis, right? Including the one that was all the news about the the one that the brain eating amoeba, right? Okay, here's a very common one here in the colon, but here's what they look like. So they have the amoebas. This is a classic amoeba. We usually have these come in of single cell, but they have the pseudopod for the extension of cytoplasm, right? Okay, pretty cool group here. Also in here include the slime mold. And I always say this looks like an egg. And if you've been in the woods and see it's like yolk running down a tree, it looks like a mold to me or a fungi. Okay. But that is the fruiting body of the plasmodial slime mold, okay? And we can see here it is, and here's a microscope showing there it is on some bark tree, and here's the sporozoan, and here's its life cycle. So it has the diploid structure that we see on the side of the tree, and down in the tree itself, probably we have these amoeboid cells that live in here that produce these sporangiums, right? And from the spores, the spores land and form more. So this is their life cycle. So half the time they're in this amoeboid cell stage, and other they look like a piece of fungi or even a mushroom. I mean, this is where these may be very close to. These are the fungilistic protozoans in my book. Okay. Whew. Like I said, a bunch of crazy stuff here. Once again, on this one, slime molds on that one probably be good. Amoebas, I think we can get some fun off of that. And then the last group here, that is the super group that includes us, right? And we put this one in here because this is the one that these conoflagellums are animal-like protozoans that are near relatives of the sponge, which would be the lowest level animal. Okay, in our animal. Actually, when I took major biology 30 years ago, we just did, it was a zoology class. We just studied animals. So all of this, like I said, I've never had a class. We went over this stuff, but I've been teaching it for 20 years or 7 years of this. But anyway, but this group includes these little guys that, look at this, that look like they can live together in a little colonial like that. And these are very close to the collar cells we'll see in the sponge that will blow water into the sponge, okay? But we give sponge status as an animal, and this is an animal-like protozoan, okay? But I think we will go with this guy. I'm looking at the last one on my list, and I'm sure I'm going to have, he is the closest relative to the sponge. I think would be a good one for him. Feed on algae or cyanobacteria, close fungal relative based on molecular similarities, right? And he's also, these guys, this group is kin to the sponges. So that would be probably our match in there. All right, guys, I'm sorry. I will do better when we get to something I know more about. Okay, there's a picture of one of them. But hey, we got to get through this. So I'm probably going to just let y'all answer off pretty much, I'm sure I'm going to pull right off of these. And sometimes I misuse a scientific name of an example of that group. Okay. Like ciliate paramecium, right? And so really simple, okay? Apiocomplexa, malaria, something like that. So look for some word, but if they do something weird from the book, I'll take it from the book. So my answer will come from this chapter, I promise. All right. I'm going to stop and I'm going to make some A&P videos, I believe. Y'all have a good day. I'll see y'all in class next week.